What if the biggest financial mistake of your life wasn't something you did wrong, but something you believed for too long? At 47, 52, even 60, there comes a moment that doesn't come with a warning. No dramatic event, no loud signal, just a quiet realization that slowly takes over. You're sitting alone, maybe at your kitchen table late at night, bills in front of you, numbers on a screen. And for the first time, you actually stop and look. Not casually, not quickly, but honestly. You start connecting everything, your income, your savings, your future, and suddenly something doesn't feel right. You've worked hard your entire life. You followed the rules, stayed consistent, played it safe. So why does it feel like you're still not secure? Why does retirement feel uncertain instead of guaranteed? That's when the question hits, quietly but heavily. Did I run out of time? Because now the numbers aren't just numbers anymore. They're a reflection of your life. Years spent working, opportunities missed, decisions delayed. And in that moment, everything becomes real. But here's what most people don't realize. This isn't where the story ends. This is where it finally becomes clear. Because when time feels limited, you stop wasting it. When the illusion breaks, you start seeing what actually matters. And when you stop believing the old rules, you finally get a chance to build something real.
You didn't fall behind because you were careless with money. You fell behind because you trusted a system that was never built to make you wealthy. From the very beginning, the message was simple. Get a stable job, work hard, stay consistent, and over time, everything will take care of itself. And for a while, it feels true. You earn, you spend, you save a little, and life moves forward in a predictable rhythm. But slowly, without realizing it, something starts to shift. Your income grows, but your expenses grow faster. Your responsibilities increase, your time decreases, and the gap between where you are and where you thought you'd be quietly widens. The 9-to-5 system doesn't fail you all at once. It works just well enough to keep you from questioning it. That's what makes it dangerous. It gives you stability, but it limits your growth. It gives you structure, but it controls your time. And over the years, you begin to adapt your life around your paycheck instead of building your paycheck around your life. This is where most people get stuck. Not broke, not struggling, but not free either. Still dependent on showing up every day, still trading hours for income, still hoping that consistency alone will eventually solve everything. But wealth doesn't come from repetition. It comes from intention. And the system you followed never required you to think intentionally about money. It only required you to participate. That's why decades can pass without real progress, because you were playing a game where the rules were never explained. And once you see that clearly, you can't unsee it. That awareness creates discomfort, but it also creates opportunity, because now you're no longer operating on autopilot. Now you can question, adjust, and take control in a way you never did before. If this realization is hitting you right now, that's a good sign, because it means you're finally seeing the difference between being busy and actually moving forward. Before we go deeper into what actually works, take a second to like, subscribe, and comment, because the next shift is where everything starts to change for real.
Starting late feels like a disadvantage, but that feeling is misleading. Because what you've lost in time, you've gained in awareness. By this stage of life, you're no longer guessing. You're no longer chasing every opportunity that sounds good on the surface, and you're definitely not driven by hype. You've seen enough to recognize patterns. You've experienced enough to understand consequences. And most importantly, you've reached a point where you value time differently. That shift alone changes how you approach money. Younger people have time, but they often waste it on trial and error, bad decisions, and distractions that feel productive but lead nowhere. You don't have that luxury anymore, and that's exactly why you move differently. Every decision carries weight, every opportunity is filtered through experience, and every step forward is intentional. This is where clarity becomes your biggest advantage, because when you remove confusion, you eliminate hesitation. You stop overthinking, you stop second-guessing, and you start executing with purpose. Wealth isn't built by doing more things. It's built by doing the right things consistently. And late starters are forced into that mindset faster than anyone else. There's no room for wasted years, no tolerance for unnecessary risks, and no patience for distractions that don't produce results. That pressure creates precision. You begin to focus on what actually works, you simplify your strategy, and you commit to actions that move the needle instead of just feeling productive. This is the point where most people either break under pressure or transform because of it. The ones who succeed don't try to catch up by doing everything. They catch up by doing what matters better than everyone else. And once that shift happens, progress no longer feels slow. It becomes focused, controlled, and surprisingly fast. Because when clarity meets consistent action, time stops being your biggest weakness and starts becoming something you use with intention.
At this stage of life, the biggest mistake you can make is overcomplicating everything, because complexity feels productive, but it usually leads to inaction. You don't need 10 income streams, you don't need risky bets, and you definitely don't need to chase every new opportunity that promises fast results. What you need is a clear, repeatable system that you can execute without hesitation. Real wealth after 45 is built on 3 simple moves, but the power comes from how consistently you apply them. The first is increasing your income. Your job is no longer your full financial plan, it's just your base. You already have skills, experience, and connections that younger people don't, and those are assets that can be turned into additional income without starting from zero. Whether it's consulting, freelancing, or leveraging your knowledge in a smarter way, the goal is simple: create more inflow without completely resetting your life. The second move is controlling your spending, and this is where most people get uncomfortable, not because it's difficult, but because it requires honesty. Over the years, your lifestyle expanded quietly. Small upgrades, small comforts, small habits that didn't feel significant individually, but together they created pressure. This isn't about cutting everything, it's about becoming intentional. Every dollar needs a purpose, because now every dollar has less time to work for you. The third move is disciplined investing. Not speculation, not reacting to headlines, and not chasing what everyone else is doing. Just consistent, long-term positioning in assets that grow over time. Compounding still works, even if you start late, but it only works if you stay consistent long enough to let it happen. Most people fail here because they get impatient, they look for shortcuts, or they stop when they don't see immediate results. But wealth at this stage is not built through speed, it's built through control. You simplify the process, remove unnecessary decisions, and focus on execution. Because in the end, it's not the complexity of your strategy that determines your outcome, it's your ability to stick with it when it feels slow, repetitive, and unexciting. That's where real results are built.
At this point, most people already know what they should be doing. The real issue is not knowledge, it's execution. You know saving more is important. You know investing consistently matters. And you understand that avoiding unnecessary debt can make a difference. But knowing these things has never been the problem. The problem is doing them every single day, especially when motivation disappears and life becomes unpredictable. This is where discipline becomes the deciding factor. Because discipline is not about intensity for a short period of time, it's about consistency over a long period of time. And after 45, that consistency becomes critical because you don't have the luxury of starting over repeatedly. The key is to remove friction from your decisions. Instead of relying on willpower, you build systems that operate in the background. Automatic transfers that move money into savings before you can spend it. Scheduled investments that happen regardless of market emotions. Routines that don't depend on how you feel on a given day. When your system runs automatically, your progress becomes predictable, and predictability is what creates momentum. Most people fail not because they lack intelligence or opportunity, but because they depend too heavily on motivation, and motivation is unreliable. It fades, it fluctuates, and it cannot sustain long-term progress on its own. Discipline, on the other hand, doesn't require emotion. It requires structure. Once your actions become habitual, you stop negotiating with yourself. You stop delaying decisions. You stop waiting for the perfect moment. And over time, those small, consistent actions compound into meaningful results. This is how late starters begin to close the gap, not through bursts of effort,
but through steady, repeated execution, day after day, month after month, building quietly while others remain inconsistent. Eventually, the results become visible, not because something dramatic changed overnight, but because the system was followed without interruption. That is the difference between people who stay stuck and people who move forward. They don't rely on motivation to act, they rely on discipline to continue.
There comes a point where the conversation in your mind changes. It's no longer about what you should have done or how much time you lost. It becomes about what you choose to do from this moment forward. Because regret has no power unless you allow it to control your decisions. And at this stage of life, that is exactly what you cannot afford. The reality is simple. Starting late is not ideal, but it is still workable. You may not have decades to experiment, but you still have years to execute with focus. And those years, if used correctly, can create stability, security, and a level of control that many people never reach. The difference is not luck, and it's not timing. It's commitment. People who succeed later in life don't rely on perfect conditions. They build around their circumstances. They simplify their approach, eliminate distractions, and stay consistent with the fundamentals. They stop searching for shortcuts and start respecting the process. And over time, that consistency compounds into results that begin to shift their financial reality. What seemed impossible earlier starts to feel achievable, not because the difficulty changed, but because their actions aligned with their goals. At this point, the path is no longer hidden. It's clear. The only question left is whether you will follow it with discipline or return to hesitation. Because the opportunity to change your financial direction is still available, but it requires action without delay and consistency without interruption. You started this journey with uncertainty, questioning whether you were too late to build real wealth. But now the picture is clearer. You're not defined by when you started, but by what you decide to do next. Awareness has given you an advantage because now you understand the system, you understand your options, and you understand the importance of discipline over motivation. The past may explain where you are, but it does not determine where you can go. What matters now is execution. Small, consistent steps, repeated over time, can still create meaningful change. This is not about catching up overnight. It's about building forward with intention. If this message resonated with you, take it seriously, because the next phase of your financial life depends on the decisions you make from here. Like, subscribe, and comment, and commit to applying what you've learned. And remember this, your timeline may have started later than others, but your outcome is still in your control, and what you build from this point forward can still create a very different future.